really think the Hindenburg was a big way to remove the world from using hydrogen as any type of fuel. I think they wanted to scare the crap out of everybody from using hydrogen and push hydrocarbons.
Yeah, I think the air flights were getting fairly successful, and they were getting used quite a lot, weren't they? These hot air balloons. I mean, they were beating the Atlantic transit times on the boats. I think maybe when the aircraft came out, there was that's when the chance for the oil millionaires came out. Really, I think maybe, I don't know, maybe. But I suppose the Hindenburg would be using sort of thruster engines, wouldn't it? Probably petrol-fired thrusters.
I'm not sure. The Germans didn't have very much hydrocarbons, eh? If any, it may have been running ethanol, corn fuel. Like that was
Yeah,
a reason why Hitler, when he went into Russia in the winter, why they all froze up, because he wasn't running petroleum. They were running corn ethanol,
yeah.
and stuff just gunks right up in the cold.
Wow, that must have been a bit of hair raising for the old Wehrmacht when they're all the Tiger tanks kind of freeze up.
Well, I like us as the Allies, we really focused a lot of our bombing runs on his refineries, right? Because they were turning corn into fuel. Germany had really no oil, and that was a big reason why they were trying to get into northern Africa and Libya.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was so close either way, really, wasn't it? I think it's the same people having another go myself.
It is. They're fighting over the who's going to control the next empire and where are we going to move the seat of power this time.
That's
Right.
right. That's exactly what they're fighting over. Yeah.
China really wants it. I mean, even look what they built in their capital city, Beijing. I mean, that's not Chinese architecture. The whole communist building there where the CCP hang out, that's all Roman architecture.
So I'll go ahead and start my presentation. I want to apologize to the audience. I had to remove the first 20 minutes of this conversation, unfortunately, because of an accidental. I don't want to release anybody's information, on the web. So I've removed that video. It's really unfortunate because we had a great discussion. Jason was breaking down for us some of the kind of HARP related signal stuff. So what we'll probably do is have him do another presentation. We'll get more people on call anyways. It'll be pretty fun to get him and Robert arguing back and forth about it anyhow. So I will say, okay, so if people go to the epemcgateway.com and they click the actual header EPMC, you'd find my product directory. So a couple of new things are out. We covered the Ashes of Atlantis here, and it is going to be published today, so that link will get updated. Conquering the Solar System, please do download the original off of Academia, but if you want to click and get right to the Google Doc, it's right here. And then the one that we're going to go over is the Something for Nothing or Light for Free. That came out yesterday. And so you'll see that there's always a highlight going on my directory. So this article, or this paper I wrote, is in response to this article. And I definitely recommend, I'll put it in the link, although it's in the paper. This is the first link in the paper. And I want to start by saying, and this is what I'm writing to him, actually, as harsh as my response will seem, actually, I fully support their project. I hope that they get their deserved funding, because although in the article, unfortunately, they declared victory, I am hopeful that they'll be able to produce a light in the darkness of the vacuum. And so what I do is I just step through the article. Of course, you can always click this bit.ly link. Will take you to the Google Doc itself. And that always means if you see that best viewed at, that means that there's animations inside the paper. So there are animations inside the paper. We'll just use this one. Do me a favor, though, always, if you can, download this PDF. It helps the algorithms, folks. Not that we have a huge audience, but, you got to search from somewhere.
Yes, definitely.
So in the beginning of the paper, I review the laws of thermodynamics as put forward by Robitaille. So we have our 0th law. We won't go through the other, the main three, but the 0th law, two thermodynamic systems, each in thermal equilibrium with a third, and they're in thermal equilibrium with each other. Seems kind of repetitive, but believe it or not, it's actually important in thermodynamics that be defined. And then the 4th law of thermodynamics, so it has to do with intensive properties and extensive properties. All equations must be balanced intensive and extensive properties. Now, this is a big deal, but it's mostly the first law of thermodynamics that seems to come up in this paper is can matter, or can light come from, which they think of as matter. We don't think of it as matter. We think of it as some form of either electric circuit or, again, as Jason's alluded to, various kinds of constructive interference in the EMF. But we don't really know. No one has an anatomy. And you're going to see people in the alt stream declare that they have an anatomy for the ether. They're going to talk about ethons and pretons and all sorts of other kinds of things. Zero porting energy. They'll tell me that they've written to me and they tell me that it's spirals and it's this and that. And we don't know. That's the truth, is we don't know. Because the vertical interferometer experiments have only been validated this year, and they haven't even put out a paper for it. And then these guys, here's the problem with their work, is that they're declaring victory via quantum math. And it says right here very clearly, in proposed experiment, postage stamp size synthetic diamond membrane containing nitrogen-based light detector suspended in super cold metal box creates a vacuum. And it acts like a trampoline, accelerated at massive rates, producing photons. Okay, that's the theory, right? And you can watch the video, here. And I put an animation in the paper as well. Okay, that's fine, but that's not science, right? That's mathematical prediction. And I hope that it turns out correct, because obviously in our plasma electromagnetic cosmology, all of quantum electrodynamics, quantum chromodynamics, is part of our cosmology. We don't separate that from. I know that there's a lot in the electric universe community, there's a lot of people who are very critical of the quantum theorists, especially the ones who are non-rationalists in the 1910s, 1920s. However, in plasma cosmology, that all comes in, because the behaviors at a quantum level affect the behaviors of plasma at the ionic level. Right. So go ahead.
It will actually be something almost akin to the Coltrane steps there, where you look at the universe and literally the quantum, the very small, is a fractal running incredibly fast, but it's a repeating the macro, the micro and the macro. I mean, as above, so below kind of type of system.
Correct. And so I take some time. I set out a number of references for people to go and find, so they can get their eyes adjusted to how we are looking at things through this cosmology. Now, what we're proposing is that they're actually, it's the void, but instead of calling it the void and going back to very ancient terms, that we're actually looking for the electrical counterspace, because the counterspace has been something that's been discussed by Dollard and Heaviside and people who have a root in this cosmology, giants of the cosmology. Speaking of which, just a little advertisement here. People can go to the PMC tab, click EU General. It says Giants of EU History. That's an excellent page. It has a number of people on it, and there is actually even a map of where these people were from. And we always need to expand this, but I mean, these are some big deal names from history, and also from modern times, including Decenti, as far as I'm concerned, with his new electromagnetism. Dollard, Wal Thornhill, Donald Scott. These are big important names. And in the quantum, there was even a woman, an important woman in history of quantum here. And you click her name, it takes you to her wiki, or click her face. So I have the quantum people on the gateway. So people can go and get educated on quantum. And under the quantum tab, by the way, there is a section called Polar Complete Physics. And that is an important section to go to understand my critique of this paper, which is, number one, we have to have a little bit of faith that, as Bruce Holbrook makes the point, according to the Chinese sciences, you can never, ever have a pure black body. There will always be some amount of light randomly arising from the black body itself, tainting the experiment. But we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they can create a perfect black body, a perfect vacuum, and that all of that will increase their ability to detect photons arising out of this vibrating trampoline. I mean,
Ramona, it seems to be how these gravitometers are working. They're meant to be they're measuring the mass, the distance between two masses under certain, what changes it, and they've got to have a completely black, electrically black system to be able to do it. And we've already seen these anomalies, haven't we, on the gravity maps? Sorry to interrupt. Yeah,
there's not really any proof that's ever been provided that, and this Robert would agree with this because he goes on about the same thing with electricity and magnetism. There's not really been any proof provided that you can create a perfect system that has nothing of the other, because of the nature of the very thought of polar complete physics, which sort of has its origins in ancient China, but and more modernly in the book The Tao of Physics, and then Bruce Holbrook's work, The Stone Monkey. The concept here is that you cannot have one without the other. So you can't have electricity without magnetism. And unfortunately, teasing them apart in order to prove one than the other, that's the obsession of the West, but it's not an obsession of Eastern sciences. But we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, because what we're interested in here is the possibility that there is a vacuum energy in the free space. I found some values here, 10 to the minus 9 joules or 5 giga-electron volts per cubic meter. I mean, so there are these massive range changes, huge discrepancies, which are known as the cosmological constant problem. And so people speculate, because of the law of thermodynamics, that there must be an origin source for this. So then we get into the article, and we won't go through all the single individual points. Obviously, you can see here what I've done is I've taken the article, broken it down, put points, and then responded to them point by point. So again, there is no detection currently. The way that the article is written is an example of the kind of propaganda and science media propaganda that we talked about in the entire Electric Universe community. And people like Michael Shermer pretend it doesn't exist and pretend to be the guardians against that. But in actuality, it exists all the time. Most peer review papers are never peer reviewed. Most experiments are never reproduced. I think I heard one time in medicine, at least, that over 90% of the research that's put out in biomedical research, that it's never reproduced at all. There's no fact checking happening in these. There's so many people doing the science. It's not like in the old days where you had a few really big names and they would do, say, the gold foil experiment, and then 20 other people would go and do the same experiment. It's not like that anymore. There's so much science coming out that nobody has a chance. These people will be lucky. They'll get my email. I may be the only person that ever peer reviews their article, right? And that
might worry them.
That's just the way we are now.
Oh, well, incredible. So people are writing science willy-nilly as they go along.
Right. They're writing it, and it's a fact of data. When I was at the Department of Defense, we had the same issue. There was more increasing pipe than there was an ability to actually filter that pipe to look for keywords that were indications of terrorism, period. And it wasn't even close. It wasn't like we were 80% of the way there, and if we just worked a little harder, we could get there. It was a losing battle we were going to be headed towards 5% of the entire pipe, and it was accelerating because Africa was coming online. Everybody in Africa was getting phones. I mean, that was dumb phones. So think of now in the smartphone days where the data pipeline is so much larger than it was before. And all the systems that were being built, hardware systems that were being built to do these filtrations couldn't be done. So and now we know because of Snowden, the NSA's solution was to duplicate itself or even triplicate itself, and then just copy the entire internet. Because what else can they do? They don't have the ability to keep up with the amount of data flow that's out there. Same thing happening in science. There's more science being done than being written about, and there's more science being ignored or treated as fact than there is people to actually fact check it. So you have this propaganda piece, and it comes out, and then to make matters worse, and this is my biggest critique of the thing, is not the experiment, because I want the experiment to happen. My biggest critique of it is that they piggyback themselves off of big names like Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein, and they start talking about black holes, and they start talking about Hawking radiation, and it had nothing at all, zero to do with what they're talking about, except if they were to admit that these Bostickian plasmoids, where the Z pinching is occurring, where the magnetic pinching is actually occurring in the so-called center. It's obviously not the center. Anybody can look at this animated file and can see that M87 is not symmetric. But at the center, that the electromagnetism, the force, and the ether are producing energy. So I guess that may be what they're getting at here, but they don't explicitly say that. Instead, they just rely on it. And I have a problem with that. So I had to step through and do a little bit of debunking of that and make the point. The center of mass is not the center of the event horizon. There is no accretion disk here. It's fluctuating. The man's that would be symmetric, but it's not. It's not. The center is not even black. Okay, there is material coming out of the center, and the image itself was produced pseudoscientifically, which is an a priori fallacy. They were stitched together, and they deleted a whole lot of data, and they knew exactly what they wanted to see, so they programmed it to form that. But nevertheless, if we can claim any victory here from our cosmology's perspective, is that they've proven that these giant black holes could be actually huge Bostickian plasmoids, which I call Bostickian superplasmoids, in order to distinguish them from the kinds that are found in lab. So here we're doing a little bit of switcheroo. That's what I'm saying, is that that there is a switch for real science with what we want there to be the story of, and it's not going to accept. Everybody knows what happens after this. The system, which is the universe here, then tries to kill Indiana Jones. Why? Because in science, when you come up with a fake solution, eventually someone will either come along and debunk you, or nature itself will defy you. The best case I could think of for that is cold fusion. They had a very complicated map for fusion. Let me see if I can pull that map up here. Let's see here, fusion diagram. It's a very famous, you want to find one of those really large ones. They always use the simple ones to go, oh yeah, here's how it works. And that's not actually the fusion maps. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Where they have multiple chain reaction.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and when they've tried to reproduce that in actual function, they never actually are able to complete the series of steps. Oh man, what would be a better search term for that? Let's see, sun fusion diagram maybe?
Possibly. To me, it almost seems like they're just trying to sustain an arc flash. Like really, we have fusion. It's not cold. It's actually incredibly hot. It's how we put together.
No, I'm not finding that. So there's a diagram, and it's in the fusion literature, and it involves some like 50 steps of achieving the fusion, because they're trying to explain how it can actually occur, and they're never able to actually replicate that in the experiment. So they went from the cold fusion with just lasers and super high pressure to switching back to plasma. Why? Because we know that plasma fusion in these plasma fusers, that the fusion is a byproduct of the electrical process. That's something they don't really want to talk about. And I think that's indicative personally. In our cosmology, we just accept that and we just roll from there. So instead of the electric field of the sun being a byproduct of the fusion, which is a byproduct of gravity crushing the star, instead, the electric sun generates the electromagnetic fields that we see, and the fusion that's happening is happening in the coronosphere as a result of the extremely high pressures and temperatures that we see, the millions of Kelvin, and as a byproduct of all of that behavior. And the natural nuclear transmutation, because there's enough energy for these nuclei to basically essentially randomly rearrange. And this is part of the cosmic rearrangement hypothesis. So then I step through, I have to provide obviously information about Crothers and Robitaille's critiques of the black hole, because they bring it up. Again, why did they bring it up? I have no idea why they brought it up. But back to the article. So then they bring up their various thoughts. And I say, this is quite interesting. I'm sold on the experiment. Seems relatively cheap. I mean, compared to the gravity, you brought up the gravity detector experiment. Aren't there two of these giant gravity wave detectors now, or at least, or three of them? I mean, they're huge and they cost billions of dollars to run. This seems like an experiment which could be done in any university lab with a machine about half the size of a lab. I could be wrong. I don't know exactly what it's going to take for them to build this machine, but I assume that, with a few $1 million, maybe under $50 million, let's say, that they'll actually be able to do this experiment. So I really do hope that they get their funding. Again, they keep putting things that need to be, that they're saying that they produce, but there are no findings. And we see this happen all the time in science media. They'll assert that something has been found when in fact there has been nothing found. If people want to go and look, the only thing that has been found is a result of either plasma, electricity, or magnetism. All right, now when they measure gravity, they're using optical scopes to do it. When they find lensing, they're looking at light waves going through a plasma medium. Every time. They're pulling the wool over people's eyes. And that's one of the things that bothers me. And then there's a few logical deductions here. And then they get into talking about, it's unclear if they meant to use the word virtual as a double entendre. So I bring up what is a virtual particle? People can click the link and go and learn about virtual particles. And then, talking about other theories which have had difficulties. Again, more just logical deductions. And again, making small corrections that they need, they should be saying that they're predicting. And it ultimately comes down to this bit here, lasing without inversion. This is what their article is really about. So here, what is lasing without inversion? It is a technique used for light amplification by simulated emission without the requirement of population inversion. A laser working under the scheme exploits the quantum interference between the probability amplitudes of the atomic transitions in order to eliminate absorption without disturbing the stimulated emission. This phenomenon is the essence of electromagnetically induced transparency. Electromagnetically induced transparency.
To me, that sounds like just rotating the wave through a polarity, like through a lens. They're just rotating it.
Yeah, but in here, they're hoping that this comes out of the void, right? Comes out of the counter space. First predicted by Ali Javan in 1956, and it was actually something that, this is important, LWI is something that was carried out in an experiment using rubidium and sodium. So that's important. And so my problem is that why don't they just tell you what's going on? What is all this with hand waving with black holes and Stephen Hawking and Einstein? Just get into the bit about the quantum physics that makes sense to you. And then here, here comes the main bit that I think is is most important. The Dartmouth paper investigates using multiple photon detectors, diamond defects, to amplify the acceleration of the membrane and increase detection sensitivity. Oscillating the diamond also allows the experiment to take place in a controlled space and intense rates of acceleration. Great. Our work is the first to explore what happens when there are many accelerating photodetectors instead of one. Fantastic. Well, we discovered, no, you haven't discovered anything yet. You've predicted a quantum enhanced amplification effect for light creation from the vacuum, where the collective effect of the many accelerating detectors is greater than considering them individually. Okay, fine. To confirm the detected photons come from the vacuum rather than from the surrounding environment, the team demonstrates the theory observes entangled light. Right, so then you got to know, oh, well, what's entangled light?
It's complicated.
yeah, exactly. So then you have to go through. So this is where, again, the problem with quantum mechanics as a community is that it's almost like they want to hide behind the mystical behavior that they're doing, as if they're afraid that the rest of the world will say, hey, that's too mystical. But we know that mystics have been a huge part of physics history. Isaac Newton was a mystic. Nikola Tesla was a mystic. I'd say there's a good argument that Benjamin Franklin was a mystic. And so what is the problem here? That we're trying to talk about something really important. Does light emerge from the void, from the vacuum? And if so, what does that mean? And that means that our understanding of entropy as a dying, dead system and all of the morose ideas that have come out of that about the end of the universe and all of this is more of our end of the world paranoia from the catastrophic.
I suppose if black holes, after the stuff in black holes disappears into nothing, I suppose if that happens, then I suppose light has to appear from nothing.
Yeah. It's a funny thing.
Maybe that's the logic.
That is a pun, but eventually that theory will disappear into nothing. It'll consume itself. The author, I'm curious about the introduction of these multiple sources, how they guaranteeing they're acting as one variable and not several. But other than that, if they can get them acting in pure synchronicity, then I'd be interested in that. And so I want people to understand this concept of quantum light here. So this is another paper on quantum light, whose abstract reads the concept of entanglement is so synonymous with quantum mechanics itself that the prefix quantum is often deemed unnecessary. There is, after all, only quantum entanglement. But the hallmark of entangled quantum states is non-separability, a property that's not unique to the quantum world. On the contrary, non-separability appears in many physical systems, pertinently in classical vector states of light, classical entanglement. Here we outline the concept of classical entanglement, highlight where it may be found, how to control it and exploit it, and discuss similarities and differences between quantum and classical entangled systems. Intriguingly, we show that quantum tools may be applied to classical systems. Likewise, a classical light may be used in the quantum process, while we mostly use vectoral structured light throughout the text as our example of choice. We make it clear that the concepts outlined here may be extended beyond this with little effort, in which we showcase with a few selected case studies. All right, so this is real. This is a real phenomenon that is being talked about, but the issue is vectored fields and structured light. I mean, why not talk about that? Why not just bring up vectored fields and structured light? Why do they introduce that goes back to the propaganda aspect. It's the authority fallacy constantly being used in these propaganda pieces put out, in this case by SciTech Daily, which I want to say I like SciTech Daily most because they're one of the few sites left that lets you put comments down below so that you can dissent from the article. Most of them, Nature, etc., they won't even put the name of the author sometimes. So I beg to differ. I do bring up Dowdy, his extinction shift principle, et cetera. And then I conclude by saying I'm very excited and cautiously optimistic about the proposition. And I think within a 1 to 3 year span of time that we'll have verification of the vertical interferometers and that we can actually produce some light out of the counter space and get all the way from this dark universe stuff. lambda cold dark matter and dark energy experimentation. We've already shown dark energy probably isn't necessary. It's probably just magnetism. And I want to make one note here is that there was an addition to the falsification table in the Dark Universe series here, that the dark energy and magnetism part was added. See the highlight. And there you go. So that was my critique of that article. I reckon that one of the ways that people can volunteer to get involved is to do more of this kind of thing. When you see science propaganda coming out using kitschy clickbait titles like Something for Nothing, which is exactly kind of the way that this article was sold. You know, go in and critique it. One of my most subtle critiques here is that I put the nothing in quotations, whereas they don't. So it's literally quote something from nothing, which they're being a little tongue in cheek, but it won't be long before they'll be claiming that they are producing something from nothing, and repeating the lie that you can't create matter and energy except in nuclear thermonuclear fusion. But thermonuclear fusion is not producing something from nothing, and we now know that, and we know that because cold fusion has never worked, never, and it never will. They've been sucking money down the drain in the cold fusion space all these years, and it doesn't work. But plasma fusion does work. Plasma fusion, and they're using radio waves to stabilize it. Probably goes back to what Jason was talking about with the constructive and destructive interference. So at any rate, that is the article that I put out yesterday, and hopefully people will get a download copy. I'll put links, and I'll still put links to the things that we talked about earlier. I apologize that we lost that segment. Well, you know what? I think it'll be fun though. Anyways, get Robert back on, get him going, get you two debating it back and forth.
Well, you know, I've always liked the analogy of a light wave too. Have you guys ever been at a big sports stadium where the wave starts going around the stadium?
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of fun.
Nothing moves left to right. The wave seems to, but really what's going on is the people are getting excited and then sitting down in unison. And it creates the illusion of that movement around the stadium. Nothing's actually moving, but it sure looks like there's something moving.
Well, there's nothing moving in the translation, but there obviously the people are standing and sitting.
That's right.
But that's the same point that you're making here. Is essentially what you're talking about is the same essence as the electrons. They're not going down the wire; they're just vibrating up and down, and the force is what's propagating down the wire.
Yes, they're exciting the copper, and that allows the force to move.
Which is really funny because then that touches on Veritasium's failed video where he fails to explain. He correctly surmises what would happen, but he fails to explain the why. Mm-hmm. And it has nothing to do with sharing the electromagnetic waves from a meter away, right? That's not what happens. I reckon that he's probably been taken by now. Probably enough electrical engineers have taken him to the woodshed that we should be expecting a video all about that experiment pretty soon. Because if what he said was true, then anytime you put a light bulb, LED or otherwise, anywhere near any other electric circuit, it would turn on. That doesn't happen. Why? Because the magnetic field drops off so precipitously because of the R squared that there is no influence. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's a meter away. It could be a centimeter away, and that's not why it would turn on. It would turn on because the force is propagating through that wire faster than the speed of light. The physical movement is, of course, not going faster than the speed of light, but the actual force itself is available throughout the entire length. So it'd be interesting for him to make that video.
In telecommunications, when we send a signal, even a signal going to your cell phone, like you said, the magnetic falls off so quick from the electromagnetic wave that we have to amplify it. there's machines built within the radios that help amplify the magnetic
Right.
because it will fall off so much quicker than the electric.
Correct. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that people still view, I reckon, they view the electromagnetic force as mystically as they view the Force of Star Wars.
Mhm.
And of course, they are historically the same thing. I mean, the Death Star is, of course, the planet Venus, and the Warrior Path is really about the journey of Mars, the warrior archetype, which is, of course, psychological, et cetera, all that Joseph Campbell, Jungian stuff. But the actual force has never ever been anything other than the electromagnetic force at various scales. When people want to know what the weak force is, well, that's when you get into the scale between the particles. And then when you get to inside the particles, inside the so-called neutron, and you have a positron and electron in very close orbit, that's where the strong force is. That's why it goes up in order of magnitude each time. So there's nothing mysterious about it at all. But at the same time, the mystery comes from that we don't perfectly understand it. And I reckon we probably won't perfectly understand it. That's my actual take on that, is that the pursuit of the Enlightenment, you want to keep the Enlightenment values, but you don't want to have the Enlightenment attitude.
Yeah.
Which we're just about at the cusp of understanding it all. I don't believe that's true for an instant. Right, so that's my paper there. Oh man. Well, you guys want to talk about anything? Do any other topics? We already did 2 or 3. Fantastic. I wish we hadn't. I wish I hadn't lost that other. Oh well.
Oh, no problem. I'm actually cooking a little bit of food at the moment, being Ramon, so I'm going to carry on with that, my friend, and I'll catch you probably on the next one, you guys, hopefully.
Okay. All right. Okay.
See you soon.
I got some work to do, so I'll get to work. Jason, thank you for joining, and Nick, thank you very much, and we'll talk later in the week.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cool. Bye, guys.
Right.
Bye.